Would you please welcome to the stage Tom W. Bell.
Thank you, Naomi, for the W and everything. Good morning, everybody. Hello. It's great to be here. I like hanging out at these events because normally I hang out with lawyers and law students and love them, but they're not super creative. And every time I come here, I meet the most interesting people, which is great because I think I'm doing some really interesting work. I want to share it with you and then maybe later get your comments and questions. I'd love that. So I want to tell you about my new book that's coming out, Your Next Government. Actually, there's a question mark, and I had to fight for that question mark. Cambridge did not like that. So it's Your Next Government, and the question mark is there because none of us should be too sure. We want to create an environment where people can try out new governments. And the subtitle is the whole revolution thing from the nation state to stateless nations. And I'm just going to get it going here. Oh, I have a clicker. Awesome. Let's try that out. All right, these guys are on top of things. It's working. So I'm going to talk about three things quickly. This is a structure taken from the book. I'm going to give you, it's a scientific method. First, some facts about a quiet revolution that is transforming governments all over the world, from the inside out and the bottom up. I'm going to tell you about that. We'll do a little bit of theory, not much theory, but I'll do a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about practice, because not only am I an academic, but also I practice in this field now, okay? It's coming. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in the field. I'm helping seasteaders and people in Honduras under the ZA system, and I've had some adventures in Liberland. I need some help with the slides, people. These aren't advancing very slowly. All right, let's start talking about some facts. Let me tell you about this revolution which is sweeping across the world, changing governments from the inside out and bottom up. I'm not here speaking for my clients. This is one of my egghead talks. So I'm an academic telling you about some things in my book which are informed by my practice. Okay, let's talk about some facts about this revolution that is affecting the world of government everywhere. From the bottom up. Let's start with the bottom up. What does that mean? Why do I say it's a revolution changing governments from the bottom up? Because they start small. Holy mackerel. They bottom up because really this happens at a local level in a lot of places with homeowners associations and condominium associations. Because one thing you learn when you start looking at those structures is essentially they are governments on a small scale. A condominium association effectively creates a government, a private government, for a single building. Okay, so many of you have seen this picture. This is a photo of Korea at night, and it shows why getting government right is important. Because if you get government wrong, you live in the dark, both literally, there's North Korea, in the dark, because they don't have electricity, and figuratively, because you're under an oppressive government. So that's a bad thing. But maybe it's worse than you think. The World Bank studied this. The World Bank wanted to figure out, they're bankers, I guess, what is the major source of wealth in the world? Now you might think, oh, it's stuff. No, it's not like jewelry and cars. That's only 5% of the wealth in the world. You might think, well, it's oil fields and forests and oceans. Nope, that's only about 18%. 5% foreign remittances, education. There's 44% left over. Now, I had to dig to get this data. The World Bank does not scream this data. I had to make this pie chart. It's shocking to me because what you discover is 44% of the wealth in the world is the rule of law. I'll go back and show that to you one more time, if it'll go back. The rule of law. So getting the rule of law right is so important that 44% of the wealth in the world is bound up in governments. Now think about it. Does that make sense? It does. Imagine if North Korea took over the government of New York City tomorrow. What would happen to the wealth in New York City? All the cars would be there, all the buildings would be there, wouldn't matter. People would flee. If you get government wrong, everything goes wrong, so we need to get government right. So let's talk about some good news about this revolution which is changing governments across the world. This is a chart that shows, I can't quite see the top of this, but it shows the growth in private communities in the United States over the last, 30 years or so. And you can see up from about 0 to about approaching now 25% of people in the United States live in private communities. And you're thinking, oh, we're talking about a condominium, like a single building. No, we are talking about whole towns. This is Highland Park, Colorado. It is a whole city. It's the largest homeowners association in the United States. It has over 30,000 homes, over 50,000 residents, 90,000 residents. It's got schools. You can see from that photo, it's got schools, shops, roads, parks. It's a town. It's privately owned and run. Very successful. People are flocking to Highland, Colorado. This is Co-op City in the Bronx. Now, this is a slightly different legal structure, but again, everything you see in this picture here is privately owned. Well, not the swampland in the background, but all these high rises and buildings. And how big is Co-op City? It is a city. It has 3 shopping centers, 6 K through 12 schools. You can see them in the foreground. They have a planetarium, a track, parks, 15 houses of worship. They have businesses. They got it all. And by the way, it's 55,000 residents. It's solidly middle class. I will confess, for my libertarian friends, it was subsidized by the government when they created that. But still, very remarkable. And this is just the beginning. Coming down the pike are even bigger private communities. This is Cake City in Saudi Arabia. It's a city the size of Washington, D.C. that they are building from scratch. It's going to have 2 million residents when they are done, all privately financed and built. It's in Saudi Arabia because they really need some reform in government there. One cool thing about Cake City, those religious police that like to go around in Saudi Arabia whipping women for showing their ankles or even their faces, guess what? It's a private community. They don't get in the door. So it's not just awesome that people are going to live in peace and prosperity, but especially in places like Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's very much on the ground making people's lives better. Those women can live unveiled in their private city, not just in a little room in the back of their house, but they can get out in markets and parks with their kids and their friends and live. That's beautiful. Let's have more of that. And you might be surprised. I'm talking about revolution. You think, oh, well, then, it's going to be like shooting in the streets. No. Most of this is happening from the inside out. Governments are actually inviting this. Now, granted, that the people I work with, sometimes we go and knock on their door and we say, we have something you should know about. That's our friend Mark Collins in French Polynesia. But still, it happens sometimes voluntarily. Now, this is Hong Kong, and we will admit Hong Kong was not voluntarily started, but it was a big success, and it showed the world what special jurisdictions can do. China, right across a little strip of water from Maoist China, was thriving, had among the highest GDP rates in the world, while over in Maoist China, they were literally starving to death, eating grass and even each other because of Mao's so-called Great Leap Forward. Chinese are not stupid. They may have been badly governed, but they could look over the fence at Hong Kong and say, that's the same language, the same culture, that's us. And they are rich, and we're dying. What is the difference? The government. The government was the difference. And so in Hong Kong, you had this incredible growth. I don't know if you can see this. From 1975 to 2009, all those high-rises sprung up, and the Chinese, not being stupid, eventually said, let's do that in China proper. So this is Shenzhen over a shorter period of time, 25 years, boom, lots of growth. That was because they implemented legal reforms. Here's Dubai over an even shorter period of time, 13 years. The short of it is changing governments for the better has this almost magical effect. If you don't understand the economics, it seems magical. You can change what is impoverished, what is sand, what is empty space into wealth because you get the rules right. So that is a big win that a lot of us care about. This shows so it says voluntary. This is a number of countries with special economic zones or similar zones in the world. There's 2 lines. You can read my book to get the details, but basically what we see is a big increase in this. Because of why? The same reason they did Dubai and Shenzhen. These countries say, we want to have growth in our country. We're going to have these special zones. That way we don't have to, a lot of government reform, I used to work at the Cato Institute, is an inch deep and a mile wide, right? At the Cato Institute, they say, we have a tax policy that is really good. Please, United States, adopt our tax policy. But the problem is you pretty much have to convince everybody in the government to go along. It's very hard to do. With one of these special economic zones, instead of going shallow and wide, you go deep and narrow. You say, in this one little tiny patch of your country, we're not taking over, just one little patch, we're going to try some pretty radical reforms. And if it doesn't work, you shut it down, we all learn from our mistakes, and we move on. But if it does work, then you can expand. So that's our model. It's working really well, especially with private parties. This is another World Bank publication about private special economic zones. These are special economic zones which are started and run by private parties. And if you look at the numbers here, there's more of them, more private zones in the world. Why? The World Bank tells us why. They're less expensive to develop and operate and yield better economic results. Guess what? Not only does the private sector do the private sector better, it seems they can do government better. That's what freedom does for you. So let's talk about taking this worldwide. You've already seen some of my examples come from other countries, some of the best examples. This shows the percentage of countries with special economic zones over time. Rapidly approaching 100%. It's flattening out because, biologists will understand this, anytime you have sort of a species taking over an environment, it's always in an S-shaped curve. That last 10% is pretty hard. You might never get the last 5%. There's always going to be maybe a North Korea out there. But most of the countries in the world are kind of getting a clue, and they're getting on board. And it's not just the number of these zones, it's their size and complexity. Again, Cake City, it's one thing to say, oh, this is a little free trade zone area, no customs and duties here. That's how these SEZs got started. How do we encourage economic growth? Let's get rid of a few taxes down at our port. And that worked. But now it's getting to the point where we say, let's create a whole government from scratch, a whole municipal government. So these zones are getting more and more complicated. There's another picture of Dubai. Again, a whole city run like a special economic zone. This is from Honduras. I've been doing a lot of work in Honduras. Some of my colleagues are here who've been working on that. And the short of it is, in Honduras, they have the world's best model for innovation in government. They have walked in, I think in computing terms a lot, and they basically stripped this machine down to the silicon and kind of said, here you go. You want to build a city? We actually want you to bring the common law to our civil law country. Come on in and do some law different because we want to have foreign investment. And frankly, this is not what the Hondurans would say, but I think I can say this, hopefully politely. Not everybody trusts the Hondurans to do government right. They're wonderful people. I've been there. But, they just don't have the confidence of the world in government. And I guess it's because for a long while they were the murder capital of the world. They've had some problems. So that's Honduras. Let's talk about the United States. And I said, well, where's the United States? And this actually, I didn't know this until I started researching the book. There's actually a lot of these special economic zones in the United States. They're called foreign trade zones. There's one right here in San Francisco. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on theory. Basically, the idea with my theory, read about it in the book, is more consent. It's that simple. It's actually more complicated. But more consent is better, and consent comes by degrees. Here comes Naomi. What am I at? 2, 1, 0? I'm at 0. Okay, let me just show you some things here. I'm going to skip that. I'm just going to show you some pictures, and then I'm going to have to talk to you later. So I've been working with ZEDEs and Liberland and Seasteads, and actually I'm going to stop there out of respect for the rest of you and your time. I'll just say, these are some places I've been working. I would love to tell you more. If I had more time, I would. But instead, look for my book. It's coming out this fall. Your Next Government from Cambridge University Press, and get all the details there. Thank you.